Good morning everyone. My name is Shawn and today I'll be presenting a project which I've been working on for my thesis, and it's on spiky electric potential structures in a two-flux rope experiment on the large plasma device. So let me begin by stating the gist of my presentation, which is that spiky structures as those seen in the top image have been observed in a two-flux rope experiment on the large plasma device, which is pictured at the bottom. Now we believe these spiky structures are associated with magnetic reconnection and the kink instability simply because the flux ropes themselves are associated with these processes. And nearing the end of the presentation, I will present a model to show how these spiky structures may possibly be produced. So we begin by considering what a flux rope is, and it's essentially a boundary surface that encloses a constant magnetic flux. Inside this boundary surface is a current which produces a poloidal field. Together with the guide field that confines the plasma that makes the flux ropes, this produces a helical field as shown in this diagram right here. So the other property of the flux rope is that it can be driven kink unstable, and that depends on the amount of current you put through it. When the current exceeds a value known as the Kruskal-Schaffenhof limit, the ropes becomes very unstable and starts to wriggle and writhe very violently. The Kruskal-Schaffenhof limit is given by this expression right here. It depends on the geometry of the rope, where A is the radius, L is the length, and BZ is the background guide field. So I'd like to show you some spiky structures which occur naturally in space observations as well as in laboratory measurements. Even though these structures have narrow intense spikes which occur in electric field measurements, they all have different physics with varying spatial structures and temporal timescales. I won't have time to go into detail into all of them, so if you're interested, you can check out the references here and at the end of the presentation. Moving on, I'd like to talk about spiky structures that were found in our experiment, the two-flux rope experiment at the Large Plasma Device, or the LAPD. The results were published in a paper in 2018, and the references are again at the end of the presentation if you're interested. Here, I will briefly describe how the spikes are produced and some of their properties. Now, the Large Plasma Device is a 24-meter long cylindrical device for plasma experiments located at UCLA. To produce a plasma, a barium oxide cathode shown on the left of the diagram produces a background plasma which stretches the length of the entire machine. This plasma is produced using helium and its diameter is 60 centimeters. On the right is a lanthanum hexaboride cathode which produces plasma for the flux ropes. To do that, the cathode is heated up and it produces a column of plasma which passes through a mask with two holes 7 centimeters in diameter as shown in this picture. What happens is the plasma will move along the chamber and terminate at the anode, which is located about 11 meters down the chamber, and this is the length of the flux rope. The plasma parameters are shown in this table, but in the interest of time, I won't go through them. But it is important to note that the plasma does not continuously discharge, it is actually pulsed. So a typical discharge cycle is about 12 milliseconds, the barium oxide discharges for 12 milliseconds, and then the lanthanum hexaboride discharges for the last 6 milliseconds. This happens at a rate of about 1 Hertz. So in every second, the experiment is over, and with that we can repeat the experiment over multiple times and collect lots of data. Now let's look at some data. Here we have a line contour plot representing the axial current superimposed on a colored contour plot representing the density. These are the two flux ropes that we see at a cross section of the machine at a distance 3.2 meters away from the flux rope mask. Now, to measure the spikes, what we did was we placed probes at 3 different locations at the flux ropes, and then we measured the floating potential at each of these positions. As you can see from the signals, spiky structures appear at the center region between the two ropes, supposedly where magnetic reconnection occurs. When you place the probe inside the rope, the signal isn't as strong, and when you place the probe outside the rope, the signal kind of disappears. There are hardly any spikes. So we've seen the signal at 3 different locations of the plane in the previous slide. Now it will be interesting to see where most of the spikes are located at. Here we have a plot of number density for spikes with magnitudes greater than 1.5 sigma of the mean. As you can see here, most of the spikes, these darkly colored spots, they are located at the edge of the rope. We note that the rope is rotating, so the spikes might be occurring while the rope is moving. Here we have the width amplitude distribution of the spikes as shown in the plot in the bottom left. Now every point on this plot of spike magnitude versus half width is a single spike, and we note that the spikes are not solitary structures as they do not have a linear relationship between the width and the amplitude. On the left of the plot, a large number of spikes have small widths and large amplitudes, which corresponds to the spikes we saw in the previous slide. The rest of these spikes may be small amplitude spikes, which were picked up by our spike counting program. It is interesting to note that the spike's half width follows a log normal distribution, as shown in this plot. Next, we note that a kink instability might be a necessary condition for the spikes to form. In this setup, we increase the magnetic field to a kilogauss, which causes the kink instability current limit to increase to 415 amps. We then varied the current through the flux rope so that the ropes were in varying degrees of being kink unstable. We noticed that for currents smaller than the kink instability limit, there were almost little to no spikes. However, when we increased the current past the kink instability limit current, the spikes started to form as seen in this diagram right here. This suggested that the kink instability and by extension the rotation of the ropes was somehow causing the spikes to be observed. So now I'd like to present a model to suggest how the spikes may be formed. This is currently a work in progress, but I'd like to give an idea of how this model works. So the premise of this entire model is phenomenology, in which you look at the data and then try to come up with a theory model to match the data. The idea is that sitting on a flux rope is a source of potential which follows the rope as it rotates due to the kink instability. For simplicity, we assume that this source is at the center of the flux rope, and a probe is fixed in position which measures the potential with respect to the source. So now to simplify this model, we have to make a few assumptions. First, the spikes are assumed to be field aligned, so that the particles creating the spikes are mostly traveling along the magnetic field, and we can ignore higher order effects that are associated with the magnetic field. Second, the spikes rotate with the flux rope, which is typically caused by the E cross B drift and in the direction of the plasma flow. Third, we only consider a single point source to simplify things. In reality, the actual potential signal could be due to numerous spikes scattered all over the place and rotating at different frequencies. Lastly, we cannot predict the actual spatial potential of the source. We can assume that it is strongly peaked at the center and falls off infinity like a Gaussian, but this is only a guess and not based on first principles in which the potential is usually derived. Here is the coordinate system of the model. The source is rotating with a frequency omega about the origin at some distance r0, and from the same point a probe is fixed in position at a distance r. Using trigonometry, the distance between the source and the probe, which is r prime, is given by this expression over here, and this contains theta, an angle which depends on time as the source rotates. Substituting that into the potential, we obtain this expression, which is suggestively written in the form that contains a non-time dependent term in the front of the exponential and a time dependent term at the back. This time dependent term, which is a cosine nested in an exponential, will create spiky structures when the interior coefficient 2r r0 over a squared is large. So here's the equation from before. If we plot a single cycle of the observed potential for various r and r0 as shown on the left, we notice that the spike with the largest potential corresponds to r equals to r0, which is when the rotation radius of the potential source coincides with the position of the probe. This seems rather expected, but we note that the shape of the potential is mostly flat, except when the potential source is within the vicinity of the probe. This creates a spike-like structure in the data. The other parameter that is varied is this parameter A, which is supposedly the size of the potential structure that is being measured. We notice that the spikes narrow when A is small, and it is shown at the bottom left of the diagram. It is supposedly trivial that the observed potential becomes narrow as the shape of the spatial potential becomes narrower. However, this can be brought about not just due to the size of the potential structure, but due to the effective sample potential that crosses the probe during the probe's rotation. In the bottom figure, we look at the frame of the flux rope that crosses the probe during measurement. The apparent path of the probe is shown in red and blue, while the corresponding potential measured in time is shown on the right. Even though the flux rope could be constructed by a potential function with a fixed spatial extent, the sample potential and hence the size of A could be different due to the relative position of the probe. Considering this and the model shown, it may explain why most of the spikes are found near the edge of the flux ropes. Now in closing, I'd like to comment that this model implies that the spike width measured in time could be strongly affected by the rotation frequency of the rope. This means that the rope rotates faster, then a narrow spike in time may be observed. In addition, the model also suggests that it may be possible to deduce the spatial spike potential by knowing how the rope moves in space and from the temporal measurements of the spike. However, these require further investigation, and a possible extension to a two-flux rope system would therefore be a subject of a future investigation. In summary, we observed spikes in the two flux rope experiments and a model is proposed. These are my references, and a copy of this slide has been made available in the handouts. Plus, if you're interested in learning more about the large plasma device and flux ropes in the field of topology, check out the talk by my supervisor Dr. Walter Geckerman this afternoon. Thank you.